This is The Briefing. I'm Marianne Mashiri. Our top story. "50 years on, commemorating the life and murder of the civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King. A huge mistake, says Mark Zuckerberg. He's now admitted data from up to 87 million Facebook users may have been misused. The first day of competitions at the Commonwealth Games, and champion hurdler Sally Pearson pulls out through injury. China strikes back, threatening tariffs on 106 US products ranging from crops like soybeans to cars. Is a trade war now inevitable? I'll be speaking to an expert on international economic law in the Business Briefing. Hello, warm welcome to the programme, briefing you on all you need to know in global news, business and sport. And you can be part of the conversation with us here today. We look at how French chefs are embracing the humble burger with a French twist. So, is it a good thing that fast food has truly broken the French food market? Would you eat a frog's legs burger? Tell us what you think. If you can stomach it, just use the hashtag BBC The Briefing. Our top story. Bells have rung out across the United States to mark the moment 50 years ago that the civil rights leader Martin Luther King was gunned down by a white supremacist. They chimed 39 times, once for each of Dr. King's years. The main commemorative event took place at the motel in the city of Memphis, Tennessee, where the murder took place. Neda Tawfik has the details.
What better way to honor the apostle of nonviolence than with a massive march for equality? Joined in purpose and united in action, they were led forward by the son who bears Dr. King's name. And the celebration of his life continued right onto the site where he spent his final moments. The large crowd rejoiced as artists performed with soul. But they also reflected on the civil rights hero's unrealized dream. Faith leaders and activists spoke passionately about the injustices that prevail.
We must show the world that while an assassin's bullet killed the dreamer on this sacred ground, on this day 50 years ago, he did not kill the dream.
Thank God for Dr. King's dream. He said we can do it better together.
He lives. He lives.
Reverend Jesse Jackson returned to the spot where he witnessed the assassination.
And every time the scab comes off, the sore is still raw. The blood still oozes. This is the site of the crucifixion. But not far from here is the resurrection, the new hope, and the new possibilities.
At 6:01, King was silenced by a sniper. Bells rang 39 times to honor the number of years he lived.
Picking up Dr. King's unfinished business was the theme of this commemoration, with the central question, where do we go from here? Many believe Dr. King provided that answer so many years ago. Neda Tawfik, BBC News, Memphis.
Facebook has now revealed that as many as 87 million users may have had their personal information improperly shared with and used by the political consultancy Cambridge Analytica. That's many more than previously admitted. Within the past few hours, Chief Executive Mark Zuckerberg has told journalists he'd made a huge mistake and that Facebook had not done enough to protect people's information. Our technology reporter Dave Lee reports now from San Francisco.
In a conference call lasting almost an hour, Mark Zuckerberg admitted that he had been too idealistic in the past, putting too much trust in third-party companies that went on to abuse the system he created. But despite calls questioning his ability to continue as the leader of the world's most powerful social network, Mr. Zuckerberg insisted he would not be stepping down. When you're building something like Facebook, which is unprecedented in the world, he said, there are things that you're going to mess up. What I think people should hold us accountable for is if we are learning from our mistakes. He said the company was putting in place stricter controls on what data can be accessed by third-party apps. Next week, Mr. Zuckerberg will head to Washington to face Congress, appearing in person for the first time to answer questions about how the firm handles the public's data. Within the 87 million accounts now thought to be shared with Cambridge Analytica, the BBC understands around 1 million were users in the UK. Despite requests from British politicians, Mr. Zuckerberg will not be appearing before Parliament, instead sending a deputy. Since the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke last month, there have been many calls for people to boycott Facebook altogether. However, it doesn't seem like they've been too effective. Mr. Zuckerberg said he had seen no meaningful impact on his business. Dave Lee, BBC News in San Francisco.
Right, we have some breaking news for you now coming out of Brazil. Brazil's Supreme Court has, in the past hour, ruled against the former President Lula da Silva by 6 votes to 5. Now, this came after hours of legal arguments between the two sides. The decision is hugely significant because it means that he's likely to be sent to prison. This is a huge blow for the left-wing leader, who of course has been considered the favourite for October's presidential elections in Brazil. It's now very unlikely he's going to be able to run. The case has divided Brazil, with huge protests for the former president and against Lula too. We of course will bring you more on that story when we can here on BBC World News. But while we have time, let's brief you on some of the other stories making headlines around the world. An assessment by British MPs on the risk posed by North Korea says that within 18 months the country will have developed the capability to fire missiles that could hit the UK. The Commons Defence Committee heard evidence that Kim Jong-un will have the ability to make nuclear weapons but won't be able to arm long-range rockets with them. MPs say the threat of cyber attacks is much greater. The Metropolitan Police are investigating the deaths of 2 men in separate attacks in northeast London. The incidents in Hackney took place within hours of each other and take the number of suspected murders in London so far this year to more than 50. Julius Maada Bio has been sworn in as the new president of Sierra Leone. His inauguration came just hours after he was declared the winner of the runoff vote. The former soldier won just under 52% of the ballot, beating former Foreign Minister Samura Kamara. Well, it just took around 11 hours to respond to the Trump administration's latest list of products from China. It says it plans to hit it with a 25% tariff. China says it now wants to impose additional tariffs on 106 US products, including soybeans, cars and orange juice. So, is there a way a trade war can now be avoided? Well, I'm very happy to be joined by David Buick, who is a market analyst. David, of course, we've spoken about this many a time, haven't we, about China and the US, and it looks as if now China is playing the US at its own game, the US is playing China at its own game. A lot of game playing here.
Definitely. I don't want to steal the thunder of your guest, who's an expert, but it does amuse me with Donald Trump. He doesn't throw a pebble in the water to get a reaction. It's a boulder, isn't it? Waves of it comes out. Because I think what he's trying to do is get a reaction. There's no doubt that China's behaved badly in terms of trade in the last 25 to 30 years. But, you know, it is the United States' most important market. And the idea that Xi Jinping was not going to challenge what Donald Trump had said was ridiculous. So he's come back with an even bigger bazooka, for want of a better expression, possibly costing $50 billion worth of thing.
Robots, war terminology. It's too early in the morning here in London, David. Let's talk about the story, because on the BBC website there's a very good article by our Asia business correspondent Karishma, and she entitles it "Not a Trade War, but a Trade Dance." I mean, it is almost as if these 2 men are doing a little jig around each other, and they want to find out who's the first one to, I don't know.
Well, I think what they're trying to do is to work out an agenda, whereas nobody loses any particular face. I mean, the stock market reaction has been violent but temporary. I've never seen daily volatility such as we're seeing at the moment, and that's caused by uncertainty. So if we can get the 2 of them round the table to start talking about this in the next 2 or 3 months, we may have some chance.
Is Trump the genius we never thought he was? I mean, you know, this could end up with China possibly making concessions, and if they do, he'd be the first American president to get that level of concession from the Chinese.
Definitely, and I think both sides know that the damage that this could do if it was for real would be terrible, because it had a domino effect all the way through.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we'd see even affecting the European Union in its relationship with the UK as well. They'll have to think a little bit more about their draconian attitude.
David, thank you very much indeed. We will, of course, be touching on all those subjects during our paper review with David a little bit later in the programme. But for now, Russia says it will use a special meeting of the United Nations Security Council later to try to challenge Britain's claim that it was responsible for the nerve agent attack in Britain. It all comes a day after the Russians were denied a request by the world's chemicals weapons watchdog for a new investigation involving its own experts into the Salisbury poisoning. Caroline Rigby reports.
A month since the former spy and his daughter were found unconscious, slumped on a park bench in Salisbury. As the police investigation continues, so too does the political row. The poisoning has led to weeks of worsening relations between Russia and the West, even talk of a new Cold War. The war of words, at least, increasingly frosty.
We know that Russia has been stockpiling amounts of this. We know that Russia has been investigating ways of delivering it. We know that Russia has previously been willing to poison outside its own borders, including in the United Kingdom. We know that it regards ex-agents as being candidates for assassination.
This is a situation that is really poisoning our relations. And this is something that we should jointly find an antidote to. The British are good at creating antidotes, aren't they?
On Wednesday, the world's chemical weapons watchdog rejected Moscow's request for a joint investigation into the poisoning. Russia has always denied any involvement in what it now suggests was a terrorist attack. It hopes to use a meeting of the United Nations Security Council to challenge Britain's version of events. But growing isolation internationally makes that a tough ask, meaning little end in sight to the ever-growing diplomatic divide between Russia and the West. Caroline Rigby, BBC News.
Do stay with us here on The Briefing. Also in the programme, would you like frog's legs with that? The chefs in France making the burger uniquely French. You're watching The Briefing. These are our headlines. Bells have been ringing out across the United States to mark the life and assassination 50 years ago of the civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King. Facebook has disclosed that the data as many as 87 million people, many more than previously admitted, may have been misused by British-based political consultants. Zimbabweans can't seem to get enough of former Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe and his wife, Grace Mugabe. A satirical play called Operation Restore Legacy, documenting the last days of his government after a military intervention, has sold out and is due back by public demand. Now, the play focuses on Grace Mugabe's role in bringing down one of Africa's most powerful leaders.
Dr. Grace Mugabe, you are under arrest for usurping the powers of His Excellency and undermining the authority of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces. You have the right to comply with our operation.
A lot of people, particularly Zimbabweans, when everything is happening, we become observers. We don't take part. We're just observing. That is the nature of Zimbabwean people. But when I wrote this play, I said, I want people to sit into a room and be part of the action, be part of the transition. So I wrote this play to bring Zimbabwean people close to historical events as they happen.
I can go to Dubai or Malaysia.
On the contrary, Madam President, your husband is safe. He still remains our Excellency. It's you and the criminals around you we are targeting.
Particularly, you saw we focused on the Blue Roof. That was mostly Father Mukonori's version of events. And as a playwright, I said to myself, okay, this is what Father Mukonori said happened. what can I do as a playwright to make it dramatic?
My decision to resign is voluntary.
The president is saying Zimbabwe is open for business. Theatre is part of that business. Film, arts and culture are a part of that business. So we expect the new administration to be tolerant, especially when the people of Zimbabwe are creative, to come up to tell their stories.
I ignored the warning signs and I let the country go down the drain.
Imagine if Zimbabwe could do a film about the end of Robert Mugabe. How much billions would be realized in that? So there's a challenge to the government. We might talk agriculture, we might talk mining, but the world is changing. South Africa, Nigeria, they are all growing. They are appreciating the arts, and it's affecting their economy in a positive manner. So it's a chance for the government to look at this. You saw the numbers, you saw the people. This is your challenge. Support arts and culture, let's grow the economy, and Zimbabwe is open for business.
To play about Robert Mugabe. Now let's head to Australia's Gold Coast and the Commonwealth Games. Wednesday saw the opening ceremony and now the actual competition is underway. But there's already been some bad news for the hosts, with local favourite Sally Pearson being forced to withdraw. Pearson, who is world champion in the 100 metres hurdles, had to pull out because of an Achilles injury. She was, of course, one of the faces of the Games and had completed the final leg of the Queen's Baton Relay at the opening ceremony. Let's head live now to Chris Mitchell, who is on the Gold Coast for us. And Chris, this is going to be a huge blow for the Australians, isn't it?
Yeah, you say that she was one of the faces of the Commonwealth Games. I would argue that she was the face of the Commonwealth Games. I've been living here in Australia for 12 months now, in the build-up to this, and you can't open a newspaper or turn on a television or look at a bus or an advertising hoarding without seeing her image being promoted. I spoke to Mark Peters, the CEO of the Commonwealth Games Organising Committee here 24 hours ago, and he told me, he said, "Oh, Sally Pearson next week running in the 100 hurdles, that's going to be the moment. That's going to be the moment of these games." So it is a huge loss to the Commonwealth Games. It's a huge loss, of course, to the athlete and to athletics. I've just come from her news conference where she didn't shed any tears, but she looked very sad indeed when she said she was heartbroken that she had to pull out now, and that she hated the fact that she was letting down her fans. But some may question the timing of this, because she told me inside that news conference that they knew about this before the opening ceremony. They knew about this a few days ago. I'm joined by Alison Kirshley, a former Scottish silver medalist at the Commonwealth Games over 400 metres. First of all, what's your reaction? How shocked were you to learn of this news?
I think, obviously, we had heard about her injury. She ran in the World Indoors in Birmingham only just over a month ago, and she definitely wasn't firing on all cylinders. You know, the explosive nature of her event, when you've got an injury like an Achilles problem, you know, that really does hamper your performance, full stop. So she definitely wasn't Sally Pearson of world champion fame from last year in London. She didn't get through to the final, and we knew that she was coming back to prepare and get herself ready. So, yes, I guess not too surprised in that we know that she was carrying an injury, but, you know, it's heartbreaking for her.
And in terms of her story, it's yet another chapter, another sorry chapter for her, because she's had some terrible times, hasn't she, over the years with injury and mishaps during races?
She has, and actually, funnily enough, although being a double Commonwealth Games champion in the two previous, from Delhi and Glasgow, way back in 2006 when she was a very young athlete, she fell in Melbourne, and of course then 4 years on she managed to, well, get disqualified in the 100 metres with a false start, but managed to get the gold in the hurdles. And yeah, she's had her issues. She's had issues with the team management, but she's always been the comeback girl, and I think to do in London what she did last year was very impressive.
Okay, Alison, thanks very much. It's worth pointing out, actually, in that news conference before we go, that she is looking ahead still to 2020, to trying to come back again for the Olympics. Whether she does or not, well, we'll have to see how that Achilles injury heals up, or whether it does at all. But yes, as you said, a bad day so far for Australia.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Now, many still see France as the home of fine dining, of rich food, high-class eating, and, of course, the occasional glass of wine. But in recent years, fast food has broken into the market. Burgers now sell more than ham baguettes, and some French chefs now seem to be feeling if you can't beat them, you may as well join them, as the BBC's Tim Ullman explains.
If you don't like snails, just call them escargot, and they'll be magnifique.
When you think French cuisine, this is probably the sort of thing you have in mind. Frog's legs, snails, relaxed, elegant dining. But the French are nothing if not adaptable, and they are moving with the times. 3, 2, 1, this is the Coupe de France du Burger, the French Burger Cup to you and me. An opportunity for France to say to the US, anything you can do, we can do better.
It's true that in everyone's mind burgers are American. I think it's a beautiful thing to capture your region, capture your culture with a popular dish like the burger.
Around 1.5 billion burgers were sold in France last year. The fast food market worth around 51 billion euros, or $63 billion. But these are no ordinary burgers. They come with a Gallic twist.
By bringing frog's legs into the ground beef, that's the originality of this burger. The frog, with green bread to recall the landscape, with swamps and rivers, and it's all made with regional ingredients.
The winning chef coming from the Southern Gard region, his burger comprising walnut bread, locally sourced ground steak and the finest of condiments. Proof that fast food can be French food. Tim Ullman, BBC News.
Well, that is our talking point today. Does the thought of the burger make your mouth water, or does it make you feel a little bit sick? Let us know your thoughts. Use the hashtag on Twitter at the hashtag BBC The Briefing. Now, do stay with me here on BBC News, because I'll be back with the business briefing in just a few moments' time. We'll be having a chat with an expert, a legal expert, on China's response to the Trump administration's latest list of tariffs. But before we go, let's recap our breaking news this hour, and that is that the Supreme Court in Brazil has ruled that the former President Lula da Silva must begin serving his 12-year prison sentence for corruption. The decision is a blow for the left-wing leader, who has been considered the favourite for October's presidential election. The case has divided Brazil, with big protests for and against Lula. It all means he'll be likely to be sent to prison. Now, what we can do is show you what's being said on our website. This, of course, is where you can go if you want more on that story. Now, the thing with President Lula is, of course, he has been hugely popular with the Brazilian people over the past few years, especially in terms of the amount of money he's spent on the poor and the amount of money he's spent trying to bump up the Brazilian economy. However, these corruption charges now mean that if he does go to prison, which is looking extremely likely, he won't be able to run for the presidential election in October, and that complicates things. So here on the BBC website we have the full story. You can read more about him and, of course, the key words and names in Brazil's corruption scandal. So do go to our website for more on that story. Before we go, though, let's return to our main story this hour and the commemorations across the United States, particularly in Memphis, Tennessee, to mark 50 years since the assassination of Martin Luther King. We'll leave you with this musical tribute.
Precious Lord,